Back here. It's almost like I didn't have any ideas as to what put as a background. Hey folks, it's Indieguy, and today I wanted to go over something special with you. A game that I am certain that no one outside the country it was developed on has ever seen it. And while this video might not be the first one on YouTube about it, you bet your ass it's gonna be the first one in English. It's also a game that I have fond childhood memories of, so you know this is gonna age gracefully. And the game in question is Portugal 1111, The Conquest of Soure, an historical RTS that was developed by a Portuguese developing team called Ciberbit, and published in the 2004 April issue of the magazine Visão. So yeah, strap yourselves in, this is gonna be a wild ride. That's all fun and all, but what is this game? Well, like I said, this is an historical RTS, but we'll get into the gameplay in a bit. For you to get an idea of what the game is about, I have to give you a bit of a history lesson first. Now, up until the 5th century, Rome dominated what is now known as Portugal, where, surprise surprise, the game is set. Now, after the Romans got their asses handed to them, Hispania was divided into two Germanic kingdoms, the Sueves and the larger Visigoths. But around the start of the 8th century, the Great Caliphate swept through Hispania and even parts of southern France, only being stopped in the Battle of Tours. Okay, now back in Hispania, a small divergent Christian kingdom was formed in what is now the north of Spain, and so began the Reconquista. The game follows the county of Portugal in the year of, well, 1111, about some 32 years before Portugal proclaimed itself as a kingdom by King Afonso Henriques. And you take control of a Christian excursion into Moorish lands with the goal of creating a buffer zone for the town of Soure, close to the river Mondego. How do I know all of this? I'm gonna tell you a little secret. I'm autistic. But does the rich medieval history of the county of Portugal influence the game in any way? Yeah, a tad bit, I guess. Both the units and the buildings look very good and historically accurate, though the history behind the Reconquista is not really touched on that much. There's like one cutscene explaining it in a very broad sense. I wish they had done a little bit more with this. A good example of what could have been done to get the historical aspects more involved would be American Conquest. In that game, before every mission, you have a narrator giving you a rundown of what happened leading up to it. While this might be a boring way of including historical facts into a game, it's still something. And most importantly, it is cost effective. It's just a wall of text with voiceover, way easier and cheaper than animating anything, all the while providing the player with something a bit more than just a 5th grade level history lesson. The thing is, this game was developed in cooperation with historians of the University of Coimbra, so they could have done a lot more and better with this. Okay, now we can get to the meat of the game, the gameplay. If I were to describe it in a single word, it would most definitely be flawed. But first, let's start with the game's economy. It tries to do something that I don't see many RTS games of this type do. That actually ends up being a good idea, all things considered. And that is the inclusion of a single resource. That being gold, which you can get from farms. For these farms to work, you first need to place them close to a river. Otherwise, they won't yield any good crops. You can also build windmills and markets. The windmills turn wheat into flour, which sells for more. Very helpful when you want to get more money fast. But the markets are a little bit more interesting, since they not only give you another place to get gold from, but they also let you build merchants for you to actually sell that flour you got from the windmill. And this is all connected. The merchants then work in tandem with the barns, which store wheat so it can actually be taken to the windmills. I was very pleasantly surprised with this. This is a very fun system that is also somewhat intricate, and I really like it. I guess that with this, the devs are trying to let us know that the Portuguese medieval society, and by extent most others in Europe at a time, although agrarian in its DNA, was very much a complex one that, if done right, could generate great profits to the landowners that were either noblemen, clergymen, or even the king, challenging our perception of dark ages. Or something, I don't know, here's Freddy Fazbear working or whatever. Okay, but for this all to work, you need your poorly paid labor, the peasants. Now there's nothing particularly special with the peasants other than the fact that there are two types, the male and female ones. And there are small differences in the way that each of them acts. Women tend to stick only to farming unless told not to, also fleeing when under attack, while men respond to attacks and will aid in the construction of buildings if they are not carrying any wheat or are farming. This is a good way to make you think of what unit you want to make. Do you want to have more farmhands or do you want more able bodies to aid construction? This is all the while you have to juggle the fact that morale will go down if population is skewed in one particular direction. Maybe? I've never seen it go beneath 80, so I'm not really sure. Now that we established an economy, we can now move on to warring matters. In other words, are the fighting guys good? Now there are a ton of units and they are pretty much mirrored for both the Muslims and the Christians. Neither of the two sides having an upper edge. They technically have different named units, but they are pretty much the same. This levels the playing field, so you can't really say that either of the sides is better than the other. But this is also just fucking boring. Yeah, they might look different, but they are just the same through and through. There's no flavor to any of the sides if they are just the same. Only when it comes to the special units are there any differences. And yeah, there are special units. For the Moors you have the Royal Guard that has ranged units, while the Christians have the Chad Templar Knights that beat shit up with their swords. But we'll get to them later. The other units though, they're pretty meh. The militias have awful stats, but they're just me for the grinder, which I can accept. Within the militias, there are militias with swords, spears, and crossbows. The crossbow militia has its purpose, but I don't know about the ones with the swords. They have worse stats than ones with the spears, and to be honest, I haven't noticed any difference between them other than that. There's also cavalry, which is actually pretty good. Even the militia ones. There's mounted archers and sword cavalry, and they both do their jobs a lot better than the infantry. As for the Templars, they have a lot better stats. And there are three kinds: infantry, cavalry, and the guy with the trumpet. What does he do? Well, he's supposed to bunch up the units into formations, but it's kind of pointless. Okay, but where can you build your units? Now, the castle is where the majority of the troops are made. Everything from peasants to goddamn catapults. There are specialized units that have to be produced outside it though, like the aforementioned Templars, the priests, the merchants, and the trebuchets. We already talked about the merchants, but the Templars and the trebuchets come from the convents, while the priests come from the churches. Now, the priests are a funny bunch, in the sense that they do fucking nothing. They're supposed to improve morale, but to be honest, I never noticed anything. Oh, and I also forgot, you can also make your own walls. And while this sounds appealing, it really isn't. Besides, a simple tower does the job a lot better. And speaking of towers, you want to know what the best strategy is? Well, that's simple. It's just saving up money and building towers. Don't worry about other points, that wouldn't happen for another 809 years. Yeah, towers are super OP in this game. They have a ton of health and take close to no damage from infantry attacks, all the while just machine gunning the enemy. Now couple this with an entire army of onagers or trebuchets accompanied by some cavalry units to protect them, and you got yourself a force to rival the Mongol Empire. Now the rule system kind of throws a spanner in the works though. The rule system is a set of rules that every unit and building has to follow. I'm not a programmer, but think of this as if-then statements. These range from if attack then fight back to something a little bit more complex, like if the number of enemies is higher than 0, then sound the alarm. You can also change them yourself. There's also a quick set of rules when you select a unit. Now, being able to change how your units and even the buildings react in certain situations is a good idea. In theory. Then you realize that there are 17 different unit types and 9 different buildings. Granted that out of these buildings only 6 have rules and only 2 have more than 1. But there is so much needless ruling that could have been done by the developers themselves. You know, like in a normal game. With this, playing the game normally becomes annoying. Sometimes units will just disregard their will to live to attack an enemy that is far away. Now my advice is to take rule D and make it into whatever you want, since that rule is always blank. Now, I wanted to get some miscellaneous issues out of the way. One of them being the sound design. Don't get me wrong, the music is pretty good. They're just a handful of 8 to 10 second long tracks and they do their job. They can get pretty old pretty fast though. Still, the music can interchange between war and peace themes on the fly. Probably the reason why the loops are so small. I like this, it feels dynamic. My problem though isn't really with the music itself, it's with the sound effects. Units make a sound whenever you select them. Usually it's a line like yes sir or something along those lines. They also make a sound each time you tell them to go somewhere. Again, along the lines of right or something. The thing with this is that the sounds overlap, which... yeah. This gets annoying fast, especially when you have to micromanage. Buildings also make sound effects when selected. It's not as bad as the units, but hearing the same 2 or 3 sound effects when I'm trying to build units is great. I will give it to the game though. The market sounds are pretty funny. There's also the problem with the map and the terrain itself. It's just too barren. Yeah, sure, there might be trees everywhere and rivers actually serve a purpose, but there is little strategic value to trees and terrain itself. They might serve as natural barriers somehow, but seem to not serve a purpose, leaving the maps looking barren. A lot of people compare this game to either Cossacks or Age of Empires. Hell, I even did that. This shows that the similarity between those games is merely superficial. The biggest turnoff though might be the campaign itself. We start off handicapped. Half the stuff that you can produce is locked out in the first level, making it needlessly hard. You want to make a windmill so you can get more money? Well, too bad. You can make a market but no merchant too. Not like it would make any difference by himself. This is while the enemy has everything, plus the special units that you also do not have. Look, it might sound like I'm just bitching about game hard, but I think if the first level is this hard, then it is a problem. This is not against the game itself, but lastly, the game hasn't stood the test of time too well. It is abandonware, so you can get it for free, but since this was made for Windows XP, it has made it hard for you to play it. There is fortunately a no CD fix, but you won't be able to update to version 1.12. What's the difference in version 1.12? I don't know. But with this, there is a huge problem with the mouse. It's just too damn sensitive, which leads to this. It's super annoying when it happens, especially when you're trying to reach a button or something and you just get teleported to the fucking void. The only way you can comfortably play the game is by moving the camera with the arrow keys. Like we're in fucking 1996, this was developed 10 years later. Before we wrap up, I want to reflect a bit on this game. No, not on the gameplay, nor on the sound design, or anything pertaining to the game itself. I want to talk about what this meant for Portugal. Now, some of you might not know, but I'm Portuguese, and I'm always very sad that there aren't that many AAA games developed in Portugal. I really started to think about this when I found out about Yugo Vault. Now, Yugo Vault was the first ever Portuguese game to be shown at E3, a full 13 years before 12 minutes. And even though it was cancelled shortly after, in 2008 due to the financial crisis, it still holds a special place in my heart and a little spot in my brain. But it's just a shame that we never got to see what came out of it though. Still, Portugal 1111 came out way before that was even announced, which inadvertently kickstarted a short-lived and quite frankly mediocre video game gold rush in Portugal. That sadly ended again due to the 2008 financial crisis. Now we do have 12 minutes in Saber Interactive Porto, that fun fact started as an animation house, so I think there is hope for the Portuguese video game industry in the future, but this could all be copium. But getting back on the game, do I hate it? No, of course not, I just don't think it's polished. If it was just a little bit more, I think this could have been a real sleeper hit. As a final verdict, I don't think I can give this game a higher score than a 3 out of 10. What you could do to fix this game is pretty simple, in theory. Just buff the infantry against buildings, buff catapults even more, but just against towers and other buildings, and lastly, simplify that goddamn rule system. That shit whack. Now, can I recommend this game though? That's a tough answer. If you don't know Portuguese, it's a lot harder to recommend, in all honesty. But I guess if you are Portuguese or speak the language, I think you should give this game a go. It's a part of history, and just like the country it hails from, it's flawed beyond repair. But yeah, that's it. See ya.
It's not thought of something strange, that's all.
What do you mean, something strange?
Well, it's simply that what isn't remembered never happened.
Not remembered?
That's right. If you aren't remembered, then you never actually existed.